The trauma is so real when it comes to the wonderful world we know as Wuthering Waves. With all of the characters' backstories we have seen so far, at this point, everyone has a mountain of trauma and tragedy. And Brant especially is no stranger to trauma and tragedy. With the introduction of the latest nation, rinascita, we have gotten an insight into how unforgiving certain places can be in Solaris 3. The Order, the Monteliers, the Phassalias, and the Troupe of Fools all share and play a large role in what we know as rinascita, as well as how the nation operates. But I will say, the Troupe of Fools really have been going through it, and I'm so glad they have finally been able to catch kind of a break. However, the Troupe of Fools would not have survived the way that it did without the helping hand of Brant. It's quite easy to see Brant as the charming and selfless leader he is. On the surface, Brant can appear quite theatrical as well as flamboyant. However, beneath the surface, there's so much to uncover. I know that that skip button can be ever so tempting, and sometimes we may miss things the first time, but that's what I'm here for, because today we are here to discuss all the ins and outs of everything we know about Brant and the Troupe of Fools. Please remember that this video is very spoiler heavy and includes lore crafting, and speculations on the 2.1 patch as well as Brant's companion quest. So if you haven't caught up with those quests, pause this video and I will be here when you get back. With that being said, let's get into the video. The darkness can be frightening. You know when you were a child and you were so terrified of the dark because your brain would play tricks on you, making you believe that there were monsters? You'd probably hide under your sheets or run to the aid of your parents. They would take you back to bed, maybe give you a kiss on the forehead, and all your scary thoughts would just simply disappear. Now, imagine being trapped in the dark on a ship, battling with unforgiving waves, forced to watch those around you perish. Well, that is what many of the pilgrims had to experience on the Pilgrim sail, many of which were young children. Only they didn't have parents to kiss them on their foreheads. No one to end their nightmare. All I know is that I feel so much sadness thinking about what the pilgrims may have went through. But why were these people even sent on the Pilgrim sail? Well, you can blame the Order for that. But first, let's talk about the first Primus Napoli. If you want more of an in-depth lore explanation about rinascita's history, make sure to check out my rinascita lore video. To summarize, rinascita was once ravaged by a mass TD outbreak, in which they refer to as the Dark Tide, and Napoli was the one to lead the restoration of rinascita after the destruction caused by the Dark Tide. According to Ruccia's dialogue, the first Primus Napoli traveled in a boat across chaotic tides in order to meet the Sentinel. It's said that when the first Dark Tide ravaged rinascita, the first Primus followed the currents on a rickety boat and met the Sentinel in person. That's where the Pilgrim sail tradition came from. Now the Fools retrace the Primus' journey, reflecting on their mistakes along the way. The Order has this thing they do where they love to glorify the most horrific actions. They take that sponsored by the Sentinel a little bit too seriously. The Pilgrim sail is one of these many horrific actions. During Act 3 of the rinascita main story, we have the opportunity to speak with the current Primus Fenrico. Fenrico explains his justification as well as his support for the Pilgrim sail. He states, "All mortals stumble, but through pilgrimage, they have cleansed their souls and atoned for their transgressions. They have earned the right to return to this divine blessed land." But this is not the true purpose of the Pilgrim sail. At least, not anymore. To put it plainly, the Pilgrim sail is a glorified execution. The pilgrims are banished from their homes, forced to traverse across relentless waters, and ultimately sent to their deaths. All as a means to maintain a false pretense of peace. And this is crazy to me because it is obvious that most of the people of rinascita know this, but of course no one can really question it because they will end up on the Pilgrim sail too. It is said that the pilgrims are forced to retrace the journey the first Primus Napoli had taken after the Dark Tide. However, a strong undercurrent has formed in the path the pilgrims have to take, and may have been manifested as a result of the Dark Tide itself. Unfortunately, this is where most, if not all of the ships end up meeting their tragic ends. Brant mentions that the Fools on these pilgrim sails often meet their demise in the storm, or they are completely swallowed by the waves. Even if they do by some miracle manage to survive, they are forced to face hunger, thirst, and the effects of being in the unforgiving wrath of nature. Oh, and did I forget to mention there's a freaking dragon? Because there's a dragon living where all the ships end up going. The Dragon of Dirge, a ravenous tacit discord that haunts the peak of Penitent's End, devouring any frequency that may cross its path. Although the origin and purpose of the dragon is unknown to us, I think that the name itself is something worth mentioning. The definition of the word dirge means a lament for the dead. Oh, but things get even weirder when we look at what the Dragon of Dirge's original name is. The original name for the Dragon of Dodge is Gehinnom. In Judaism as well as Christianity, Gehinnom is a valley of spiritual purification, in which the souls of people are cleansed from the wicked deeds they brought about during their time on earth. It is also said to be a place where many would sacrifice their children. Now, I don't want to say that the Order has been sacrificing people to a dragon or anything, but that wouldn't be the craziest thing to say out loud. The concept of there being a big bad dragon and people using human sacrifices in order to appease the dragon is so common in many mythologies. For example, in the Christian legend of St. George and the Dragon, there is a dragon terrorizing a town demanding sacrifices, who George later slays. I guess in terms of rinascita, the rover is George? In these different stories and mythologies, there is usually a hero who comes to slay the dragon, ultimately portraying the symbolism of the triumph of good over evil. But this path to salvation and rebirth that the Order preaches does not exist. All of those lives that were taken by the Pilgrim sale were nothing but a ploy of the Order. And to me, that makes the Order the worst of the factions in rinascita. To see human life as something so disposable is such a detrimental perspective to have. It's apparent that the Order just really don't care. There's a limit to doing things for the greater good, and many of the Order's actions to me are unforgivable. It was never for the greater good of rinascita, but for the greater good of the Order. Despite it all, there is a light at the end of the ever-so-dark tunnel. There have been some survivors of the Pilgrim sale, and many of them have ended up with the Troupe of Fools. Anyone who pursues freedom is a fool. This is almost a sort of creed that the Troupe of Fools have, and it's true. Anyone who chooses to not act in complete compliance with the Order's belief, you're branded a fool and swiftly sent on the Pilgrim sale. Now, here's a cool thing I found, and it involves tarot. In tarot, there are many cards, all of which can represent your past, present, and future, as well as who you are as a person. And one of these cards is named the Fool. See where I'm going with this? The Fool's visual representation often depicts a young person standing at the edge of a cliff, seemingly about to take a step into the unknown. Very fitting to the Troupe of Fools and what they had to endure before finding a community with one another. The Fool can represent new beginnings, innocence, and the potential for a journey into the unknown, encouraging you to embrace opportunities and take leaps of faith. The Fools who survived the dragon's assault, whom the Order refers to as the Pilgrims, drifted on the warm currents, eventually finding refuge in a vast cavern on Penitent's End. There, the Fools formed a troupe, determined to one day expose the truth hidden by the Order and return to their homes. To achieve this, the troupe wrote numerous plays and danced in chains, performing tirelessly across the archipelago. For years, they have awaited the return of the Carnival, hoping to expose the Order's secrets through their performance, claim the laurel, and earn the chance to commune with the Sentinel. As anyone who had been banished would want is to be able to return to their homes and loved ones. As this archive entry mentions, the troupe had been waiting for the return of the Carnival, in hopes that one of them would be crowned with the laurel and be able to communicate with the Sentinel. But here's the thing, the troupe already has someone who was once crowned with the laurel, and his name is Bardolino. Considering that Bardolino is now a fool, you can probably guess that he was exiled and sent on the Pilgrim sale. But you would think that someone who is basically a rinascitan champion would get some sort of pass, right? Well, unfortunately, that is not the case. Let's be honest, if the Order can put the Blessed Maiden in prison for 3 days for simply just having a good time, then that pass is non-existent. When questioned about why he was banished, Bardolino explains that during the time he had won the laurel, Ragusa was actually being run by the Holy Maiden. He says that she promoted all sorts of grand celebrations during the Carnival, with music, dancing, food, and wine. The city was such a stark contrast to rinascita under the Order's leadership. An interesting thing that Bardolino also mentions is that the Holy Maiden once said that if she were to ever leave this world, she'd want no over-the-top grand tomb or a depressing funeral, but the grandest Carnival of all as her final farewell to the people of rinascita. Fenrico, the crown primus, then took her place and in the name of mourning the Holy Maiden, issued all sorts of bans on the Carnival. After the Order took control over rinascita, things became a lot more mundane and the Carnival performances were reduced to shadows of their former selves. They were missing the heart that they once had. And although the Troupe of Fools had been exiled from Ragusa for the longest time, in a way, they are the most free. Freedom is something that many spend their lives searching for. And through their performances, they are able to not only earn a living, but also spread their message to the people of rinascita. And the person leading this group is the one and only Brant. Brant has always been an adventurer at heart. Some could say that he was actually born one. He was never meant to be bound by restriction, he was born to be free. In one of Brant's cherished items, we are able to get a glimpse into his childhood and life before he was sent on the Pilgrim sail. This cherished item is named the Initial Treasure, a preserved ammonoid fossil. In the item description, it mentions a young Brant stood proudly atop a table as he presented his newfound treasure to his father. His father recognizes said treasure and recalls an adventure of unearthing the past and seeking the truth. Reading this reminded me of something I had come across in Phoebe's voice lines. In her voice line about Brant, Phoebe states that her mother once told her a story about an adventurer braving storms in search of freedom, and that Brant reminded her of this adventurer, which could mean that there is a possibility that this adventurer may have actually been Brant's father. I guess you can say it runs in the family. Although we don't exactly know what happened to Brant's father, we can conclude that he may have passed before Brant was sent on the Pilgrim sail. And speaking of, we actually know why Brant was sent on the Pilgrim sail. And honestly, the reason why is genuinely outrageous. You know when you're a kid and you're just so curious of everything around you, you ask your mom or your dad constantly, what's this? What does this mean? Or my favorite one is, just why? Brant reveals to us that when he was a boy attending the Cathedral of Mercury, he gazed at the statue of the Sentinel, pointed at it, and asked, how can you say it's the Sentinel when no one has ever laid eyes on it? As you can probably tell, something like that is not something the Order would be the biggest fans of. So they sent Brant on the Pilgrim sail. During his Pilgrim sail, Brant recalls being protected and cared for by the other Fools. They shielded him from the tragic reality he was facing, and their kindness and smiles brought comfort to a young Brant, who at the time was probably so scared and confused. Brant became too familiar with grief and loss, as he was forced to watch as they passed away one by one. From that day forward, I swore to wipe away the tears of the innocent. Every adventurer needs rest, and every ship must find a port. For us, that meant finding sanctuary. After washing up on the shore, a small group, Brant included, managed to survive the brutal Pilgrim sail, and when they had finally reached Penitent's End, they were able to fight off the tasked discords and scavenge what they could from the ship's wreckage, to finally begin building the Troupe of Fools sanctuary. Sometimes I do think about how the fact that 3 characters, Brant, Carlotta, and Phoebe, all at one point were so heavily involved and influenced by the Order. They were all orphans, all of which attended the Cathedral of Mercury frequently, and yet all of them ended up in such different places. Carlotta was taken in by the Montelli family and raised to become one of the most feared women in rinascita. Phoebe was raised in the permanent presence of the Order and became an acolyte for them. And then there's Brant, who was exiled to his death for asking a question and became the leader of the Troupe of Fools. And I'm not trying to weigh up their traumas or anything, but Brant really got the short end of the stick here, which makes the person who he is today so great and likable. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. I feel like this is a perfect way to describe Brant's situation because ultimately it takes a special kind of person to be the leader of a group like the Troupe of Fools, and that role cannot just fall on just anyone. One thing that makes Brant such a great as well as complex character is how genuine he is. His kindness and his care for others, but also his ability to be able to make the right decisions are one of many of the things that make him the perfect leader. Unlike the Order, Brant will always put his people first. Even other characters know this of him. His name itself means a person who is very passionate about a particular cause. Although Brant has experienced mountains of trauma, especially from such a young age, his kindness has never dimmed. He hopes that one day to not only gain true freedom for his troop, but also for all people of rinascita. In Carlotta's voice line about Brant, she states, he's the captain leading his crew through tempestuous seas, and I often wonder whether his gaze from the deck reveals ambition or selflessness and passion. Our family once extended an invitation to him, but he declined, remarking, a captain's ship is his alone, and he will never abandon it. Thus we remain partners with aligned interests, and that suits us just fine. That aligned interest being the freedom of all people of rinascita. In another one of Brant's cherished items called All the World's His Stage, it shows a sculpture of stacked masks, a portrayal of the many characters he has played as well as the performances he had performed in. Leadership comes naturally to Brant, but so does the performing arts, something that Brant genuinely enjoys taking part in. The Troupe of Fools travel across all of rinascita delivering fun and vibrant performances to their audiences. Playwrights, performers, and general creatives often praise the Troupe of Fools for their art, referring to it as dancing in chains, a defiance of the weight of conformity with their performances, with Brant never failing to be the center of everyone's attention. But offstage and behind the scenes, Brant can just be Brant. Well, kinda. The thing is, Brant is always performing. He never leaves that stage. because when he's not performing for the people of rinascita, he's performing for his troupe. And I don't mean that he's dancing and singing, although that does technically happen. What I mean is that Brant takes off one mask for another. No matter what, he must always be the strong, decisive leader, because the moment he shows any crack of weakness or anxiety, the rest of the troupe will shortly follow. To be a leader, you must always be perfect. And that sounds pretty exhausting. I certainly don't envy Brant's position. And as I said before, what makes him such a good character not only morally, but just in terms of writing, is that no matter what trials and tribulations he may face, he never falters. Another thing that I realized while going through Brant's lore is that he kind of reminds me so much of a character named Ezekiel from The Walking Dead. Ezekiel is the leader of the kingdom, a community surviving the apocalypse, and the people of the community refer to him as the king. A role in which Ezekiel takes quite literal and very seriously, but not in a narcissistic kind of way. Ezekiel takes on this role of king as a means to create safety and illusion for his people. Through him, they can cling on to hope. They can live in a fantasy world and be sheltered from the horrors of reality. But really, he is no king. He's literally just some guy. And regardless, he would do anything to protect his people, and he does all of it through his genuine kindness and care for others. Similar to Brant, Ezekiel can be quite different when it comes to behind the scenes. As I said, behind the scenes, Brant can just be himself. At Intimacy Level 4, you can unlock a passage called Through the Sea Storms, which retells the story of Brant sailing through a chaotic storm of thunder and torrential rain. The most fiercest storm that the troupe had ever faced, serving as a brutally honest reminder of how insignificant one can become when facing the unforgiving sea. In these moments, everything inside of him was telling him that this was the end for him and his troupe, that he should just give up and let the sea claim them. Give up, fools. The wind howled in his ear. Look at your pitiful ship. How will you ever lead your crew to safety? But Brant refused to let the sea win, nor the sea beast that was quickly gaining on them. Full speed ahead. Let's move, my friends. Tonight we will tame this sea. Leave the beast to me. His voice pierced through the wails of the storm. The ship continued on as Brant hurled himself forward with his grapple into the unknown and towards the sea beast. After a while, the storm had ended, and as the ship drifted along, all of the troops stood there anxiously waiting for their captain's return. He'll be okay, one of his members reassures. Shortly after, in the golden light of the rising sun, they saw him, their captain, riding atop the colossal sea beast's head in a triumphant return. There are no lengths that Brant wouldn't go to ensure the safety of his people. To Brant, life is worth fighting for, and all life deserves freedom. At the end of the 2.0 main story, Fenrico declares that all members of the Troupe of Fools can finally live freely in Laguna, and has granted them permanent rights. And although I would love to say that this was done out of the goodness of Fenrico's heart, I just don't buy it. Regardless, I'm so happy for the Troupe of Fools that they can now live in a hopefully peaceful life without banishment. But I will say, I do think very soon we are going to see a lot go down in rinascita, and I just hope that with whatever happens, the troupe can finally rest. Well, with that being said, we have reached the end of our time together today. Please feel free to let me know in the comments your personal thoughts and theories on what we discussed, and as always, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe if you haven't already. I will see you in the next one. Take care, my loves. Bye!